Hello and good afternoon. Hydro7Slot back with another video, and in this video I'm going to be going over the 3 things that I've done to my drivetrain to help it run at a cooler temp and help it perform as best as possible with this factory 3.6. So one of the upgrades that I've done is this S&B cold air intake. In my last video you guys could see that the filter was really dirty, and something I didn't think about was the idea that the filter had to get changed out. I don't know how it went over my head, but I installed it and the vehicle just performed so well that I never felt the need to swap it, as I just never thought it needed swapping. I don't know how that got into my head, but I'm glad I called. When I got on the phone with the S&B cold air intake rep, they told me that they suggest that the filter gets changed out every 5,000 miles. This has easily been on for more than 2 years. I've done all these 3 upgrades that I'm going to mention in this video as of 2022 February. So I installed them over a weekend, and when I installed them, all 3 of these upgrades I put on easily in a matter of 2 hours, just maybe 3, but that's pretty much just to give you an idea as to how long this might take to install. And that's including cold air intake, aluminum radiator, and an aftermarket exhaust. So the aftermarket exhaust took out a good sum of that time, just because you might struggle a bit with taking out the factory one. But on this video I'm going to be going over the 3 products that I have to help the drivetrain run at cooler temps and perform as best as possible, and just the biggest advantages that they've come with. So this cold air intake from S&B I chose because compared to a K&N, it's a nice product and it's a reputable brand. Now the only thing is, with the K&N, it didn't seem like they had nice, visually appealing options. So with this one, it's a nice presentation. It makes the setup look nice and clean. It has a glass screen with the S&B logo, and it just seemed like the nicest setup. So with this one, you actually have 2 options of either opening this up or opening the bottom section up. So I chose opening the bottom section and leaving the top side closed, just because I really like the glass screen that the S&B comes with. When I do 40s, I might even open up both just to give it as much of a cold air airflow as possible. So according to their website, the efficiency rating on this cold air intake is a 99.46%, and the airflow improvement is a 46.7%. That's a very big difference compared to factory. I actually recalled when I first installed this, around like the first couple of weeks, I was in a parking lot and I was passing by a buddy. I did all the upgrades and he wanted to see how it sounded, so I gave it a bit of gas. And when I gave it a bit of gas, I could actually like recall, I remember perfectly clear hearing the intake suck in all the air, and I've never heard that from the factory intake. Like, you can hear it performing. It sounds like it's doing its job, and it definitely does considering the size that the filter has. I have the old one in the trunk and I'll go ahead and show it right now so you guys can see what it looks like. The size of the filter is so big that I personally, like, by looking at it, it looks like it belongs like on a V10. Somehow it's on this 3.6 V6, but it's a pretty big cold air intake filter, and you can definitely see how it does its job. So I also have a Mishimoto aluminum radiator. So for my Mishimoto aluminum radiator, prior to installing it on the temp gauge on the dash, I every now and then passed 2 lines past the midline. So there's like these little hairs, and then it's pretty much 4 quarters for the temp gauge. It's normally not supposed to pass the midline, but every now and then prior to installing this radiator, I'd pass the midline and do like 2 lines past the midline. But ever since I've installed this aluminum radiator, I have never passed the midline at all. It definitely does its job. Being that it's aluminum, if I'm not mistaken, that's a big advantage, as it helps keep the fluids cooler and all those type of things. And I also have a MagnaFlow exhaust. I'll do a startup so you guys can see what it sounds like. Now, the MagnaFlow exhaust is a very good exhaust. The only thing I will say is that it comes with a slight con of the fact that it's pretty loud. It's the Off-Road Pro version, so it drops off right in front of the rear axle. And what I mean by pretty loud is if you're on the highway and you have 4 friends in the car, if it's 5 people in the car, 4 people in the car, and you're on the highway and you're going highway speeds, you're gonna hear it. You're gonna tell it's there. You're gonna know it's there. It's gonna be a little hard to have conversations with friends. You're probably gonna have to be talking like at a loud volume at your friends, this and that. Now, I did do all 3 modifications at once, so maybe the cold air intake makes the exhaust a bit louder. I could be wrong, but it's just an assumption I'm making. But the exhaust definitely is loud. Now, 2 benefits that the exhaust has is, 1, being higher clearance. With the higher clearance, you can go rock crawling, you can go off-roading in the woods, and you won't have to worry about banging up into a rock, a log, whatever it may be. You have that higher clearance. And if I'm not mistaken, that would actually possibly even come into more advantage when you put skid plate, because I could be wrong, but I feel like if you have the factory exhaust and you're trying to do a skid plate, you might have to like swap out the exhaust, just because exhaust from factory might hang a little too low. And yeah, so that's one thing that I would consider an upgrade, or a pro compared to the exhaust. And another pro to the exhaust is, since it's dropping off right in front of the rear axle, you have more clearance to work with when you're doing things like a coilover system. I'll show you right now. So there it is in front of the axle, and yeah, this whole space is now clear. When I do run the coilovers, I'll be able to run the coilovers with more clearance, and might even give me more room to work with. And yeah, so one thing I will say is, back then, before doing track bars, I did front and rear track bars. In my first video, I made it seem as if I was getting death wobble on both the front and the rear. That's impossible. Well, as far as I know, it's impossible. I was getting death wobble on the front. So one thing that I will say is, when I was getting death wobble on the front before doing the track bars, I was on a road trip, I was on the highway, and I was on a 2-lane road. The highway was 2 lanes, and there was no like side to get off on. And when I would get death wobble, I'd have to stop the car and slow it down up to like 15 miles per hour just for the steering to get straight again, and like for it to not wobble anymore. And then I'd have to speed up back to highway speeds at around 60 miles per hour. And when I had to do that like 5 times in the trip, and the exhaust would just quiet down because I'm braking, and then speeding up to get back to the highway speed, and how loud it got, that's the only nightmare I remember having with the exhaust. Besides that, the exhaust is manageable. It takes some getting used to. If I would have known that MagnaFlow themselves has the ratings that they have, I probably would have gone with the rock crawler exhaust. The rock crawler exhaust is the same idea, except it cuts off over the rear axle right in front of it. But I already have this axle, I already have this exhaust, so I'll just go ahead and work with it. And in the future, after I do all the suspension, all that type of things, I'll go ahead and see if I can maybe go to the rock crawler, to a more subtle but nice sounding exhaust. So one thing I will say, as far as my cold air intake filter, I'll see if I can show you guys the size of that thing right now. It's pretty big. If you ask me what does that look like it would go on, I'd probably say like a V10 or at least a V8, but look at the size of this thing. It is huge compared to, I don't know, but I expected it to be a little smaller. It's like a V6 3.6. Like, I didn't expect it to be this big, but I can see how it performs for sure. It's a great exhaust. It's a great cold air intake filter, and it's definitely done its job. And yeah, that pretty much covers just about everything that I've done for the drivetrain upgrades. If you guys have any questions, feel free to drop it down in the comments. Like I said, I'm all new to this YouTube video things. These are pretty rough. I'm stuttering a little here and there, and I'm like rambling, but I'll definitely work on it. So that'll pretty much cover just about it. And let me see if I can do a startup so you guys can see what it sounds like. But yeah, hope you guys enjoyed the video. Have a great afternoon and take care.